Time to talk about a Disney show that never really took off, even though it was pretty popular with those who saw it. Fillmore. The show works really well because it follows a genre that kids would not be familiar with, 70s cop shows, and follows the formula to a T. So if you've seen a lot of cop shows, you might be able to appreciate the parody, or this show might be the most stale thing ever. I don't really know, it all depends on your perspective. But beyond that, Fillmore was a pretty good show that was cut short before its time, a little bit before Dave the Barbarian actually, which was also cut short. Disney has a lot of shows that run quick and die in obscurity relatively quickly. Let's hope, ladies and gentlemen, let's hope. Today's episode, when it came out, I probably would have criticized for being too over the top and too bludgeoning, despite being like 13 years old. But both of the issues this episode talks about have gotten much worse in the real world in the decade since this episode came out. And yes, I said two issues. One of them is obvious. This episode talks extensively about standardized tests, at least how we do them here in America. The other issue this episode talks about is destructive protesting. Sounds like fun, right? Yeah, I'm not promising, but I'm just gonna say that it might be one of those episodes. Also, me using an episode to talk about a tangential topic, especially with Admirable animation, is not a new thing. I've been doing it since at least The Mask. Fillmore is about the former troublemaker Cornelius Fillmore, turned into a member of the school safety patrol, where he gets to cut class and tackle other kids with his partner, the no-nonsense Ingrid III, who has a photographic memory. The show takes on one of the hardest cities known to man, the suburbs of Minnesota. I actually bring up the state because it's going to be relevant to this review, and this episode might be different if it took place in another state or another time period. Also, this episode was made in 2002, so I am going to assume that that is the present date within the episode. I'm fairly sure that if it was made today, it would be vastly different. This episode starts during a standardized test, oddly enough. Ingrid finishes her test really quickly, while the other kids are struggling. Outside, she comes across another kid protesting. So she goes to her desk at the safety office, instead of her next class. Yeah, one of those things about Fillmore is that it's one of those shows that asks you to buy a more difficult premise to chew. It wouldn't happen in any facet of reality, but if you let us run with this, we'll tell really good stories. Not totally surreal like SpongeBob, but not totally realistic like, say, Hey Arnold. For some reason, animation is the best medium for this kind of show, and it was really popular in the 90s and early 2000s, although there are definitely some live-action exceptions. Actually, I do know that reason, and consequently, it's why making live-action movies based on a cartoon is a bad idea in principle. I was talking about the episode, let's go back to that.
It's a gift from Principal Folsom. All the card says is, "Thanks for knocking the Satty 9 out of the park, kiddo." Why would she send me this?
Because if enough students don't pass a standardized test, even at the time, the government would cut the school's funding, making it harder for the same school to pass the same tests. Such tests may have been made harder and require more competent teachers in the meantime, but if too many kids didn't get a good enough score, some teachers may have been fired and replaced by new teachers who may not have been as qualified. These tests have created quite a vicious cycle in America. The logic is, I have no idea. If you're not using the money to teach the test, then you don't need the money? Or if you're not interrupting your job for this thing, then you're not doing your job correctly?
A single, multiple-choice test designed to measure the academic achievement of millions of different kinds of kids. One size fits all.
I'm not going to lie, whoever wrote this episode and I have a very similar opinion on standardized tests. This episode doesn't really show the positives of it. It's not ideal for the episode, but it is better than a straw man. Also, there's a subplot where Ingrid is going to get a scooter for her birthday. So, a kid dressed in a lobster costume steals the tests. They find the usual mascot kid in the locker room trapped to a pole. Cop show stuff! Then the principal comes out and says that they all have 48 hours to find that test. If they don't, the whole school will have to take the test over again.
You'll have to take it over! The 79 or Senseless Aptitude Tryout tested yearly was the hardest test I've ever taken!
Back when this episode came out, this was a display of over-the-top test paranoia. 10 years later, no, this is rather typical. Real people in the real world would really act like this. People in the real world sometimes do act like this.
It took 3 hours! I saw spots!
Except that, now instead of 3 hours, try an entire week. 6 hours a day. Yes, the tests are supposed to make kids learn more by taking them out of class for an entire week. Also, there's been one major development since this episode came out in regards to standardized tests. Many of the United States will not let a student graduate if they do not pass one of these tests. Not just take the test, you have to get a passing score. If my math is correct, and it should be since I passed the math exams here in Massachusetts, all of these students would have graduated high school before passing the standardized tests became mandatory in Minnesota in 2010. And that's really a sticking point about standardized tests for me. If a faculty protests these tests, they lose their funding. If a student protests these tests, they don't graduate. Speaking of which, let's talk about the other message in the episode, which is probably just as poignant. They chase down a guy who they think stole the tests, past some cheerleaders.
See? You're as solid as a Geodude using his harden attack. Nothing could possibly...
People, there's a lesson to be learned here. Geodude sucks. Unfortunately, this guy isn't the criminal. At least, he's not the thief. He's the thief of a box of tartar sauce. Insert SpongeBob clip here. This guy tells them to go to an egg roll restaurant. Ingrid remembers one of the kids in class having a really hard time with the test. Of course, as soon as possible, the kid Seth tries to run. Another cop chase! Yeah, this show has a lot of them, just like how a superhero show would have a lot of fight scenes. It comes to the genre. Finally, Ingrid stops Seth at a drawbridge.
Please, Ingrid, you gotta understand. You were there. You took that test. I couldn't let down my mom. Or Mr. Collingwood after 4 months of his prep class. They give you that test and they think they know how smart you are.
I know the test is lame, but what you did was wrong.
But you know why I did what I did. Please, Ingrid, just let me jet.
Yeah, this is a kid show about a cop with a morality against the law she's enforcing. I gotta give him props. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. And no matter which side you pick, someone is going to get mad. There are people with strong opinions on both sides of the aisle here. The side they pick is that a cop not following the law and turning their cheek is the wrong thing to do, even with a law they disagree with. They strongly stick to that side. I'm not going to say they're totally right or totally wrong here, because this issue is a lot less straightforward, especially when you live in a country with the highest prisoners per capita of the world, and many people fear police brutality. The point about the test they come up with here is that it really hurts the more creatively minded kids, and even proponents of standardized tests have got to admit that, especially since the first things that many schools cut are arts for more fucking test prep. You see him crying there? I've actually seen that personally in reality because of standardized tests. And no, test anxiety is not an excuse to get out of these tests. Being in a fucking coma is not an excuse to get out of these tests. And honestly, the actual moral of this episode really transcends its subject matter. I feel that this is also more poignant than when the episode came out. Think about it. Any self-declared vigilante with little knowledge can easily go out and dox someone, DDoS them, or post their information to a slander website. Or, good lord, who knows how many other things. And that's if they don't have a following or a cult of personality. In this era, our actions are more visible than they have ever been before, and doing illegal or clearly immoral activities to protest casts a negative light on your entire movement. Yes, there's such a thing called civil disobedience. If you think you're smart enough to use civil disobedience correctly, you're probably not. Sure, breaking the law to make a point might get you more visible, but it'll only make you visible as a lawbreaker, and it will demonize everything else you stand for. Seth here didn't steal the tests, but he did use a bunch of cheat sheets. Anyway, the principal is pissed. She's making plans to re-administer the test. I'm assuming that if tests in real life were stolen at all, they would immediately re-administer them. Then again, since they hire people on Craigslist to correct the exams, who the hell knows? Ingrid gets sent to a counselor in the meantime because she needs to heal from the trauma of having the test stolen. That's the actual excuse they use in the episode. So, does stuff like this happen in real life? I can imagine a child being terrified their parents would do something horrible if they learned out that the tests were stolen. You know the old stereotype of your parent hating you because you come out as an atheist? You get a similar effect in more areas of America if you tell your parents that you don't want to go to college. I'm not kidding. Yeah, when a kindergarten class has to cancel a play for more college prep, let's just say that standardized tests aren't our only educational problem in America. There's a very significant problem where kids tie their entire self-worth to their grades, and unless it gets to the point of, physical abuse, it's not demonized among the parents. Hell, some feel that their parental love is staked in their grades. Why? I don't know. Maybe it's because our politicians want our schools to be more like Japan. I do hope they realize that won't work ever because our society is highly individualistic and not anywhere near as honor-based as Japan. Also, in Japan, a parent who drives their kid to educational achievement to their emotional detriment is a very unlike media stereotype. And the high pressures of education in Japan is leading to many young people there dropping out of society entirely, leading to a lot of unemployment and a birth rate below replacement level.
But for the last 3 months, my mom would tutor me after she got home from working at the gravy factory. How do I tell her someone just stole all that work away?
Some kids naturally have a difficult time on standardized tests. It's just who they are. And it really hits kids with disabilities like dyslexia. Experts say that dyslexics only need more time, but faculty or Washington or whoever doesn't give any accommodations to disabled kids in most cases, because doing so concepts the question that all kids are completely identical. I've seen nonverbal kids in wheelchairs being forced to take the exams. Granted, if you're in a coma or missing a brain or outright dying, holding a diploma isn't going to do much to you. But if you can pass every class class and your only disability is dyslexia or test anxiety, even if you have an IQ of like 120 or something, school be all like, fuck you, pass the fucking test. Most kids before school can figure out that the square peg doesn't fit through the circle hole. But that's the only thing that standardized tests taught me personally.
Something. I want you to reach down and just shout out some words that you feel describe the person who stole your Satty 9 tests.
Villainous, iniquitous, reprobate, Machiavellian.
Like I said, even if people are affected negatively by an event or cause, protesting it through illegal means, at best, makes the opposition look like assholes, or at worst, makes them look downright delusional. Outside, Fillmore searches for the lobster costume. Okay then. Inside, Ingrid follows a test protester, but gets noticed. The case seems to be getting close to solved. Fillmore can't fit through the locker room window with the lobster costume, poking some holes in the hostage's story. The protester did not steal the test, but she has a secret admirer. The secret admirer is Elliot, the hostage. He is the guy who stole the tests. So we got another chase scene because students can use scooters and the janitor's waxer in the halls. Also, what would a cop show be without close-stitch explosions? And that's the episode. Look, I can talk about the American education system all day and several aspects of it. I mean, it's gotten to the point where if I ever have kids, it will not be in this country. And before you say anything, even most homeschooled still have to take standardized tests. I know way too many people burned by the systems and heard stories of way too many more. And the only solution that any of our heads of states have while in office is fix standardized tests with more tests or harder tests or both. Yes, we can repair the city if we use more bombs with more destructive power. I mean, a bomb blew the city up. More will fix the problem. This is sound logic. Schools in the United States begun in August or September, depending on the district. I can guarantee you that many schools are already spending a lot of time preparing students for the standardized tests that they will be taking in May or June of next year. Either that or they're relearning things from last year because it's been pretty much proven that if you learn and study for a test, just for a test, like they do with the standardized tests, you will forget everything that you learned shortly after. Except for Eli Whitney inventing the cotton gin. No one ever forgets that, and I don't know why. I've never even been on a cotton farm and I still know that. Everything in this video is said by someone who graduated high school easily and passed these standardized tests on his first try. Most of my audience is as young as I am or younger. And if you haven't been one of these kids portrayed in this episode, you've probably seen kids like this. It can make you seem trapped. You're either really good at taking tests, or you're afraid in some volition that you might not pass and it's going to ruin your entire life. You might suffer from anxieties and you're too young to vote on these things that primarily affect you. The first thing that you have to realize is that you're more than whatever the hell these tests say. There's more to you than just the answers you can give. You have dreams and aspirations that go beyond a test. No one else can tell you what those are, and no one else can stop you from wanting them. Secondly, it's easier than ever for a young person to get their voice out there. You can request for help studying, or help with anxiety, or spread awareness of your opinion, or learn on your own if that's your type. Even here on YouTube, there are great channels that do a very good job at teaching quickly and effectively. Also here on YouTube, there are other people protesting tests, like Sully Breaks and John Oliver. Each are seen by millions of people. So keep in mind that other people with an audience do see these problems, and do want to do something about it. Speaking of being visible in the rest of my audience, being visible comes with consequence. There are many people on the internet who do all kinds of heinous acts to sabotage this figure or vandalize whatever website. If you haven't seen it, you haven't been on the internet long enough. Their logic is probably that whatever they're against, the people behind it may never take them seriously or even give them the time of day. And they might be right. But using destructive and illegal action paints whatever you stand for in a horribly negative light with would-be neutral third parties. How you speak is just as important as what you speak, perhaps more so.